Well, a little bit after the hour, so let's get started. So, Sanjay, maybe we go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So, just to welcome everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm Nigel Biswas-Baldwin, co-founder at Phraktion. Maybe one or two people join us outside of Phraktion, just to highlight that a really exciting time for Phraktion. Really now just over our first year of operation. Really with an ambition of beginning to change how pharma works, and with that offering really industry-leading expertise. We'll see an exemplar of that with Sanjay in his presentation coming very shortly. And the important part around it is we're very well connected globally from West Coast and US right the way through UK, Europe, down into Asia and into Australia even. And with that, really trying to shape even how the biopharma industry will operate into the future and how we work. And central to this is learning from each other through our peer-to-peer webinar series. So next slide then, Sanjay. So delighted to introduce today's session entitled, Science is Brilliant, but why the heck I need commercial input during development? And Dr. Sanjay Khandekar is going to tell us precisely why that is. Perhaps we should include the dark side in our science, perhaps, Sanjay. But just to introduce Sanjay a little bit as well, I've known Sanjay for, I don't know, the best part of two decades now, having worked together originally in the oncology MDC at GSK. I know Sanjay very well as a very well-respected and loved colleague across the oncology community. We were just discussing that with Raz before, the sort of close-knit community we have going around oncology, and Sanjay has been central to that during his career, really spanning the science, the R&D and commercial, and brings a very good perspective around that. And I think I should also highlight today that we actually have a special guest, Pooja Khandekar. So no additional pressure today, Dad, but really over to you, Sanjay.
All right. Any questions, you can always ask Pooja, because she's probably more expert than me now in the oncology space. So, but thanks very much, Nigel. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to this group. Hopefully more people will be joining shortly. So in terms of next maybe 35, 40 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about myself in one slide, my career journey, and then more importantly, what I bring to Phraktion and the customers that will be working now as well as in the future. So it's been really great opportunity to work with all these esteemed colleagues. Some of them I knew from GSK days and some I'm getting to know now. And then I'll get into bulk of my presentation, talking more about what's commercial really brings value in drug development and why I need to really think about it as you kind of go through the early stage of drug development and then throughout the life cycle of drug development. Just a little bit about myself. I have a PhD and MBA. And then currently I'm a founder. I'm the founder of SSK Biopharma Consulting, which started about a couple of months ago. And then around the same time, I joined Phraktion and its network. The role or the function that my company, as well as the work that I'll be joining and doing with Phraktion, it's providing advisory services to healthcare companies, both pharma, mid-size biotech companies, as well as early startup, where probably I see a lot of value in providing these services in terms of market assessment, new product planning, as well as the commercialization aspect as the product matures through different phases of its life cycle. Most recently, I was at Shattuck Labs. I worked there for about 2.5 years. And then prior to that, I was at GSK for over 24 years. And working those years, both in R&D function as well as marketing and early pipeline commercial strategy function as well. And got a lot of experience at GSK in terms of what is really to take about drug development. In terms of my experience, I have very broad and deep pharma biotech experience and in R&D as well as in global US marketing. And the experience that I'm proud of is my lab to launch experience that I actually had fortunate to work with Raz when we were actually developing pazopanib, which is Votrian now branded drug. And that molecule actually was developed in a lab where I had opportunity to work on. And then seeing its approval in kidney cancer, renal cell carcinoma, and then working collaboratively closely with Raj on sarcoma indication was very rewarding for me. I work on several candidate selection activities in different therapeutic areas, so I have a broad understanding of, in general, pharmaceutical space, but more my in-depth experience has been in oncology, and I'm fortunate to work in both solid and heme tumors area, as well as in supportive care area. I have significant publication as well as file, and most recently the patent that I filed on the BCMA ADC work that we had done is now granted. So I'm also very proud of that particular achievement. My overall experience, 30 plus years of experience, actually has all phases of drug discovery, from initial, say, drug lead through as it goes through preclinical space, and then all the way to commercialization and then life cycle management. And the most interest of me is actually bridging that R&D commercial interface. And so working on that phase, not just thinking about science, but what does it really mean to get a product to market, and then how patient can benefit, and then how the stakeholders can benefit from its launch, as well as the successful utilization in the area. So with that brief background, I'm going to get deeper into now what the value of commercial is in drug development. I'll very high level talk about R&D process. It might be preaching to choir for some people. Some people probably don't know the kind of some of the early stages of drug development. So I'd like to walk them through briefly about that. What are the key decision points as pharmaceutical or biotech company need to think as the product goes through these early phases, preclinical, all the way to then launch area. The key area focus for commercial planning, and I'll walk through several of those, as it's important in terms of differentiating your product, developing a value proposition, and then how all that actually entails into your clinical development plan, so that we'll have a product not just in one indication, but multiple indication down the road. And along the way, then I'll showcase a few examples without naming the product itself, but talk you through how some of these activities are critical, particularly in the early stage of drug development, so that there is actually a value in getting the product to market. So this kind of gives you an overall perspective of drug development. And drug development is actually a long and more expensive, and it's getting increasingly expensive and to some extent very unpredictable too. So quickly, this is shown in a linear fashion, but obviously there are a lot of ups and downs to this whole process. The product, as in terms of the target selection, it starts with this early discovery phase. And this is where actually a lot of preclinical work in R&D discovery phase goes on, where scientists from different areas, protein biochemistry, gene expression, et cetera, start working on a molecule that is actually a lead generation process. And then it could be an antibody or it could be a small molecule, but all that work actually goes on here in terms of assay development, showing that your product is actually some specificity, some early preclinical data. And then, after years of work on that, and there's a lot of failures actually, which you never hear about those, it actually goes through this candidate selection process, where I think well thought through process in terms of knowing the preclinical animal testing data kind of validates that this particular molecule or this particular antibody is actually worth taking into clinic. And once you have that candidate selection is declared, then the clinical team, along with the several commercial regulatory folks, start working in terms of the first time in human drug plan design. And then the objective is that to show the safety of this molecule, particularly in the oncology space, as well as some efficacy to show that this molecule has merit to take it forward. And what we call there is the initial proof of concept. And then build on that, you can get to the next level, which is a phase 2, a larger trial. Sometimes it can be a randomized trial, sometimes can be just a bigger patient population trial with a specific defined criteria. And this is where actually you generate the full POC, the proof of concept, so that your molecule, you have belief in it to take it to the next phase, which is a much larger trial. That's a randomized trial, and it's probably done at the global level. After the success of that travel, then the group will come up together to plan for filing and then launch preparation. And then after that, it will get to the FDA, EMA, as well as the other regulatory authorities in Japan or other places to get the approval. And then you think about the life cycle management of that along the way with help with medical affairs team, as well as some of the key stakeholders in that. A very high level, how you go from discovery all the way to launch and then the life cycle management. Obviously, the key thing is that this process actually costs a lot of money and takes time. And so one thing I realized over years, and hopefully the people on this team agrees with me, that we're increasingly realizing that the regulatory approval is not enough for commercial success. And the reason for that is that there is a lot of increasing demand from healthcare providers as well as payers. And what they're looking for is that a high value medicine, and these are well differentiated, not me too products, but what kind of value that they're providing to the healthcare overall system so that there is effective cost reduction that will bring then the product to market and successfully use. And this is the major hurdle for getting a molecule to commercialize. And many actually companies may actually decide not to take the product to commercialization just based on some of the findings that we get during this process. And so this is where I think where the commercial consideration ought to be considered throughout this process. And I'll walk you through the next slide in terms of where those points are, where you need to get those consideration or the input. But the key question that we need to ask is, are there enough patients for this drug? You're developing this molecule. There are patients, and then are they going to be there by the time you launch your product? And so you need to kind of think that upfront in terms of thinking through which indication that you're going to go, and then how the drug will be used and which patient will benefit from that. The next question is, will prescriber choose this drug or other options? Now, yours is not the only drug that's available for physicians to use, and they're looking for what, not just the incremental advantage, but the step advantage that will they have offered to their patients. And this is where I think you need to make sure that you get that understanding up early front, is that what are the unmet needs are, where the bars are, hurdles are in terms of the efficacy as well as the side effects or even dosing and regimens that from you can get that by asking prescribers. And so your key objective is to make sure that your molecule or your drug will be used over your competitor drugs. And lastly, but most importantly, is that somebody has to pay for it. With the pharmaceutical whole drug development and then value proposition process hinges on what the payers are going to be ready to either put the drug on the formulary, or they're going to give a preference for your drug or other drugs, how they're going to tier it in terms of its usage. And so the key question is going to be, will someone pay for this drug? And then also more importantly, can we get a premium pricing? Because in terms of successful commercial launch, we need to think about what the value and then what the pricing proposition is going to be for your drug. So very high level in terms of how you go from R&D to all the way to file and launch. And then what are the key questions we need to start thinking as you are going through this this development cycle. One last point is on the top of the slide is that in oncology particularly, what we're noticing is that if your phase 1 trial is showing some remarkable efficacy in a targeted patient population, the molecule can quickly go and bypassing this phase 2 and phase 3 larger trial for a quick accelerated or conditional filing and approval. You would require a full approval at some point, but this is where actually going from this early phase to registration is very exciting. At the same time, you have to make sure that you have actually clear understanding of what your drug is going to be offering to the patient, as well as how payers will react to that in terms of providing the critical input. So in terms of the commercial input, what I've shown here is that there are several places that the commercial can provide input and is critical in terms of the decision point and as well as the investment criteria. As the molecule moves from drug discovery to candidate selection, this is where commercial plays a role in terms of providing very high level understanding of this process and then where the opportunities are. You're going to the first time in human. This is where we talk about your indication prioritization, as well as how you're going to kind of select which indication to go based on the data that you're generating. The proof of concept, where you start thinking about what is actually the total cost of the drug is going to be to take it to phase 2 and then commit to development. And then from this to phase 3 is a major decision point, because this is where actually the real value of the drug, as well as the analysts, investors are interested in this, because this is where actually now it says that this has a potential to come to market and everybody start noticing your product. File to launch is a key milestone from both commercial, clinical perspective to make sure that how you're preparing for your drug and are you ready for filing, and then those interactions with the regulator are critical at that point. And then when you're ready for marketing, this is where I think commercial starts playing large, more important role to get ready for launch readiness and then marketing the product. So the level of commercial involvement then clearly increases significantly, kind of little in the beginning, not much in the drug discovery phase, but increasingly over time as the product profile as well as the product gets mature in different phases, the commercial involvement is really increasing. And what I've shown at the bottom is the critical thing is what this commercial strategy brings is that it delivers superior strategic input, and this is very critical, and that will provide that direction to key R&D milestone, so that at the end we'll be able to develop differentiated and more importantly reimbursable medicine, and not just in the one market, but across all of the markets that you'll be using or launching your drug. So from commercial perspective, some of the things that you need to think about planning, I'll highlight it over here in the different formats. They're not necessarily in sequence, but the first thing is to understand your target disease and market. What are the unmet needs are? What are the standard of cares? Not only today, but in the next 5 years when you're going to be launching the product. What are the patient stratification? Which patient are going to be benefit from your drug? Which are the one who will be the earliest adopter for your drug? And then how over time your indication can be expanded to other patient profiles or other patients. The key thing is to then develop target product profile that is the minimally commercial viable, because ultimately the commercial viability is that critical. Having just 10 or 20% improvement over your current standard is not going to help us getting for a successful launch. And so this is where I think you need to understand what is the critical differentiation is going to bring to your product or competitor, and then what value attributes as well as the differentiation story that you'll bring in your target product profile. All this will depend on the customer centricity, because you need ultimately your physicians who are going to be prescribing the drug and the patient who will be using, and also the payers along the way to see how valuable these profiles are. You need to get that input from them throughout the cycle. And also getting patient advocacy is also a key thing. And this is where the actually commercial work very closely with medical affairs to understand, which section, how we can actually work very closely with the patient advocacy group, not only in the clinical trial design, but also making sure that we get their understanding in terms of what their needs are, looking for a new product to come into the market. We also need to start then thinking about conditioning or building your market. And so this is where the unbranded campaign, it's not going to be a disease specific or product specific, but it's mostly a very broad level of conditioning your market about what is coming, what are the unmet needs are, and what they're looking for in terms of a molecule that's being developed, but not specifically talking about the product. And then at the end, it's probably the life cycle planning, but that actually starts throughout the process for the label expansion, as well as thinking about follow-on indication, as well as new combinations. So there are two questions that we need to think, and I bucketed those as shown over here. It's the first thing is where to play. And also along the line that you need to think is that where not to play, because that's the critical thing. Sometimes you're kind of putting too many eggs in basket, or you're doing too many trials that has no value. So I think it's critical to really know upfront is that making sure that you decide which is the market, or which are the agent, which are the patients that you will be targeting, or the drug, your disease area, which you'll be targeting. And this is where the indication assessment prioritization is going to play a big role. The second part is then how you're going to win. Once you decide where you're going to play, you got to then start thinking about your winning strategy in that space. And this is where then understanding the launch success and the threshold for that and the various different scenarios and decision tree is a critical in developing that. Some of the key questions that as you think about where to play is, as I talked about, is disease landscape, unmet needs, the compelling patient population, the standard of care and hurdles, what are the development costs are going to be, the opportunity for launch price, and then what are the key regulatory constraints that we need to think, not just for one market, but the US versus Europe. There are a lot of different standard of care because the particular drug approved in the US may not be approved in European markets, for example. The market shaping and building activities are then how we can think about getting speed to market and thinking about parallel development. What are the key rational combinations that we can think about? And then getting those input from KOLs, building those relationships with your KOLs as well as your key stakeholders is going to be critical for your product positioning as well as you're building your differentiation story. So all this together then helps drive the clinical development and investment decision, which is done actually and in parallel with clinical team. And this is where actually you need to get the alignment with clinical team as well as the regulatory team to make sure that the development and the launch plan that we have is aligned and then build solid based on patient focus, market needs, and differentiation. I'm going to talk a little bit about indication assessment and prioritization here. And this particular exercise is a critical one as you think about your where to play decision, as you start thinking about the clinical trial design, and then the first time in human trial as well as the POC trials. So this is typically led by commercial, but in strict or in strong partnership with clinical, and then also from preclinical, regulatory, and project management. And this is where I think need to think about the potential disease indication. What is the scientific viability in particular disease? And don't get me wrong, commercial is important, but science trumps. And it's important that good science is going to be critical in order to take your drug in the next development stage. So the merit of science, the novelty, the scientific advantage is going to be very critical that will build your value story along the way. In terms of commercial factors, which is the next important thing, is that what is the market telling us? What is the size of the market? Which patient that you'll be going in and what are their unmet needs are? To get into the market, are there any entry barriers? Are there any access hurdles? Are the competition is too much? What are they offering? What the differentiation they are building in based on what we have learned from their product profiles? And then more strategic level is getting to market very quickly, and then opportunity to have a maximal pricing by indication as well as by geographic area is going to be critical as well. So all this process of indication assessment and prioritization help you actually identify the gaps in your development strategy plan, and also compare different diseases, different indication, and then provide a strategic aspect for a holistic look at your drug development. It's also a living document, and then also generate and allows you to get gaps or understanding what kind of we need in terms of to making sure your product profile is going to meet those requirements that are expected by your stakeholders which includes your payers as well as the physicians. So in my previous work, and then other companies have following the similar kind of profile or steps in terms of the indication sequencing. And just high level, I talk about a structure or logical evidence-driven approach that is worthwhile taking into looking at which indication will merit taking it forward versus the ones that you want to either park or you want to eliminate in your development planning. So first of all is the list of disease indication. Then the next thing is that you agree on a weighting parameters. And this is where the input from all your stakeholders will come from in terms of which of the parameters are critical, and then how much weighting that you'll be giving for those to compare in an unbiased manner. And then lastly is that there'll be discussion around what the opportunity for each of the indication is based on the commercial criteria that I laid out in my previous slide, and what the risk and investment consideration we need to think in terms of the clinical trial design, the possibility of patient accrual, what the clinical trial costs are going to be, what are the hurdles are going to be, what are the hurdles in terms of efficacy are going to be. And so this is where actually it's going to be critical in terms of we laying out the weighting based on the opportunity scores and then strategic thinking. And then after that, actually, the thing is that you map each of the segments in a chart and then prioritize. And this is probably your initial document that you put together and can be refined over time as your profile matures. And so the one example I'm going to show here is this compound 183 that we are developing in early phase. It was a selective kinase inhibitor, and the phase 1 data as well as the preclinical data showed that it had merits of testing in multiple heme indication. And the one that highlighted are here is multiple myeloma, CLL, lymphoma, the Hodgkin's lymphoma indication, as well as ALL, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And so as a team, we looked at these indications and we kind of looked at the high level assessment based on the scientific rationale, unmet need, patient population, and etc. that we talked about in my previous slide. And we rank order those and filter those based on each of those, say, 5 indications. And then with using the statistical as well as the analytical framework, we did a 2-dimensional chart of this molecule, which is shown briefly on the prioritization matrix. On the y-axis, you have opportunity, a particular disease area with a low and high opportunity, and the level of risk and investment, high and low. And the bubble chart is actually the patient population, the patient size. And this will tell you what is the commercial opportunity is going to be for a particular indication or a particular disease that you're looking at. So the outcome of that particular framework or the indication prioritization exercise is highlighted on this one slide, that multiple myeloma was highlighted as the relatively low risk as well as high opportunity tumor, heme tumor, and then followed by Hodgkin's lymphoma and ALL in this kind of a one bucket, even though these 2 indications based on patient population is much smaller. And this is where actually, conceptually looking that you think that DLBCL is pretty large market, why don't you go after that? But here actually through the commercial framework and then discussion with clinical team, we realized that if you want to go in DLBCL, the hurdles are going to be hard, the trial duration is going to be longer. And so maybe our opportunity, even though it looks high, is net opportunity is not going to be as attractive. And so you can see that we can prioritize now these buckets of your indication based on the scoring that we got for the opportunity versus the risk, as well as the level of investment required. So the next step is then the building your story and then developing your where to play more so. And now I'm going to show you example for heme space and multiple myeloma that we're looking at. Because from the indication prioritization workshop, we kind of felt that multiple myeloma should be our initial indication. And then we can think about either in simultaneously or sequentially the other indication. So the multiple myeloma market landscape, this was done a long time ago. So a lot of things have changed in the last 5 years or so. Sorry. But what I'm going to show here is that in terms of the market understanding is that we realize that the market is big and growing. So there's opportunity to get into this. The patient population is high. Over 200 patients are actually with prevalence, and the incidence, which is the number of new patients, is increasing. And more so in the Western market, that incidence is pretty high. So clearly, Western market being attractive, there's good opportunity to, if you want to go in multiple myeloma. Now, in terms of the standard of care, we realized that at that time, there were only 2 major classes of drugs approved, and they are widely used. The class was proteasome inhibitors. Velcade, which was Millennium's drug at that time, was the majority of the share, and it was used across the lines of therapy from first line to third line. And that actually captured, based on our market research understanding, about 60% of the share. And the immunomodulator, Revlimid, now at that time, it was a Celgene molecule. It was acquired by BMS about a few years ago. But it's also used quite widely in multiple myeloma space. At that time, it was only second-line indication, and then Pomalyst, which is another immunomodulator, also from Celgene. Together, they had roughly about 40% usage based on our market research suggested. More importantly, there is high unmet need, because what we realized through patient as well as physician research was most patients, even though they're treated and they show initial response, they relapse over time. And so there is a high unmet need for patients who are relapsing to your prior treatment with either IMiD or your proteasome inhibitor. And so for that, there are several new generation PIs as well as other MOAs like antibodies. And daratumumab, which is now a big asset in this space, was being developed around the same time we started looking at this particular molecule. So we knew that there could be some competition, but in terms of our product profile, what we realized is that this particular molecule is innovative. It was a first in class. It was a selective oral kinase inhibitor. And so there were very few inhibitors that were being developed in this space. So we could have that competitive advantage being first to market as well as first in class. Our preclinical data, which was generated by the R&D colleagues, showed that there is synergy with this standard of care, both PIs as well as IMiDs. Importantly, this is orally bioavailable molecule. And then it was also active as a single agent, which is a critical thing these days to show that the monotherapy activity for your molecule that you're taking into clinic is becoming more increasingly important to take the drug development forward. Particularly for this molecule, the molecule that we have showed in phase 1 had activity in Velcade. And so we had confidence that probably synergistically this molecule can be combined with standard of care and hopefully will show more efficacy or better improved efficacy compared to Velcade. And a very high level assessment of market and then opportunity for our product, we felt that it has peak year potential about, say, 300 to 500, which is big enough market to take it forward in terms of the POC as well as the phase 3 trial. Of all that work, then what's taken into account in terms of what will be overarching development strategies going to be in myeloma. And so talking about the landscape and what are the new emerging agents in this area are going to be, the aligned strategy with based on clinical commercial interactions and the strategy, and then with getting input from the senior stakeholders, we decided that, at that time, the best path forward will be the first trial will be a standard of care trial with Velcade, which is we have enough proof of concept. The market entry will be in global, because globally that was the standard of care. Kyprolis, which is the second molecule, was already had approval in this space, but was in later line of therapy, was actually emerging as a standard of care. And so as a next step to stay in this game and own that multiple myeloma piece with PI class share, it was important for us to think about that combination as well. And so that second trial was kind of proposed to do that trial in combination with Kyprolis. And then lastly, third trial, which Revlimid was used in certain markets, particularly in Europe, it was the standard of care more so and most widely in second, third line at that time. Also thought that it'll be good into kind of broaden the indication with another multiple myeloma standard of care. And so that was the label expansion trial in that particular aspect with the standard of care. And it will be attractive to a lot of physicians and more so patients, because it would have given all oral regimens, and so it'll be much easier to take from the commercial attractiveness as well as the patient preference perspective. So this is how actually the strategy evolved over time. But the initial entry strategy was to get into a market with a standard of care, which we had initial proof of concept data. So all in all, the indication or disease assessment actually allows you to evaluate what is the optimal prioritization sequence strategy, where and then how you're going to play in that order. It gives you a clear understanding of the market. It will also allow you to do some scenario planning and then develop pros and cons, and making sure, all importantly, the drug development, as I mentioned before, is very expensive and allows you to do critical choices and investment decision throughout the process. So you can actually stop the trial, say go, no go early on based on how you're developing your product profile and how you're shaping the market and the input that you're getting from your key stakeholders. Now, this is my last slide. I just want to talk about, there's several things that go on in terms of getting ready your product for the launch readiness. And what I've done is that bucketed these in the two ways. Your first bucket is the indication prioritization, shaping the development plan. And this typically has a key role from preclinical all the way to phase 2, 3. And then the second bucket is the market shaping and go-to-market activities, which is phase P2 or phase 2 to phase 4 aspect, so post-launch. And then I bucketed these from the activities at the bottom here, your landscape assessment, the market understanding, competitor assessment, target product profile development, the product insights and markets building activities with the physician, KOL research, patient research, payer research, as well as having Congress presence is critical. The opportunity assessment is critical as you start building your story. So the forecast at the global level, what value in terms of the net present value that you would do in combination or in partnership with your colleagues in the commercial as well as in finance. The pricing is a key aspect in that opportunity assessment as you build your value. What is the price scenario is going to be, and then the competitor assessment. And then lastly, go-to-market and launch readiness is very key. And that typically done about, say, 3 years prior to launch is optimal. Start thinking, which markets you're going to go. What are the branding aspects that you need to think about? What is the logo design, the brand book, the packaging strategy, the market-specific pricing, the value hypothesis. Then you start building your regional team, working collaboratively closely with medical affairs in different markets. Start thinking about resource allocation models, the country-specific forecasts, and then establish that go-to-market model and launch sequence scenario that you will be ready then effectively putting all that launch plan for the launching of your product. So that's my last slide. I know I went very quickly in my presentation, but I wanted to just give you a very high level of the role of commercial, critical, and then how commercial brings value in drug development all the way from, say, candidate selection and then throughout the life cycle management for that particular drug that you have on the market. With that, I'll stop here and see if there are questions.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you, Sanjay, for a very detailed, fascinating discussion. I think an important reminder for me, at least, that yes, you're absolutely right. The science is often brilliant, and development can be very complex. But if you don't put alongside that a very detailed map of your commercial opportunity and strategy, then a lot of it is for waste. So a very important reminder, yet again, for me around that. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions from the group, please feel free to come online or put in the chat. Raz, you have your hand up, so.
Thanks, Nigel. Sanjay, great overview. Thanks very much. I wanted to ask you for your thoughts on a particular scenario, and this is, I think, more prevalent with the smaller biopharma companies, and this is where you've got your initial early data, maybe end of phase 2. You've got your target population, and their commercial guys come along and they say, let's expand the patient population slightly. Let's tweak it so that our phase 3 population is a little bit broader, a little bit bigger. And you and I both know, we've seen this on past occasions, where potentially there is a significant risk of diluting the efficacy as a consequence of going to a broader population. What are your thoughts from a commercial perspective against, guarding against that? How there is a temptation very clearly to go for obviously a bigger population that ends up in your label, but there is also a risk involved. So can you add some comment and thought to that?
No, I mean, it's a valid question, a good question, actually. And obviously, from the commercial perspective, you always want to get a bigger market, because the idea is that more patients can benefit from the drug that you have on the market. But again, rightly said, Raj, that there are downsides to that, and there's more risk associated, because now your mixed population, you're not clear whether your efficacy that you're seeing in a small pre-selected population is going to be held through as you expand that population. I think there's no easy answers, but what I would do probably in that situation is that this was scenario planning, the pros and cons, and then can play a critical role in this. And the way I would look at it is that probably you have your initial population that you're looking at with a defined patient population, and you know that this particular population could bring, say, 100 million based on your optimistic scenario. And as you're kind of adding additional patient population, you can probably may think that it may increase, depend again, like how wider that population is going to be. And it can go from 100 million to, say, maybe incremental, if it is only a tweaking that population a little bit, or it's going to be just mixing and diluting so much that you think that probably it will double the size of the market. But I think it's probably the risk analysis, if you could take into that, and then probability of success. And this is where I think in the previous work as well as my recent work, we did that actually, that the probability of success criteria will definitely tilt in terms of mixing that population. And it's probably hard to give that answer at this point to say, okay, I would lean one versus other at this point. But probably my interest is that if you want to get into market very quickly, I would probably not mix that population to kind of jeopardize your initial indication. You can always broaden it through your medical affairs trials, ISS trial. You can do a small trial later on to see whether you can expand that population, and then get your through NCCN or some kind of a criteria to show that expand that. But I would ideally probably try not to mix, even though I'm a commercial guy, that the bigger population would look good. It's probably you're kind of risking too much. And if the goal is to get to market and get that soon, it's probably best. I would not do it, but I'll do a good business analysis to show that probably there is more merit to doing this way versus the other way.
Yeah, thanks.
Your thoughts. I mean, you and I work in this area, and always, there's a push and pull from both commercial and clinical side. But how would you do this?
Yeah, I've had a couple of discussions in the last few years with smaller companies where there's definitely been that push and pull as you describe it. And I think, you know, there is, particularly for a smaller company, the importance is actually getting that indication over the finish line,
Right.
because they've got a limited amount of cash in the bank, as it were, and, you know, time is money. So rather than trying to risk going for that much bigger population, I've always tried to recommend, you know, where the data is strong enough to actually go for that maybe slightly smaller population, but actually having much greater probability of success and getting it over the finish line.
Yeah, and the fast to market or early launch is always the important thing.
Yeah.
Your, you know, even from the commercial perspective, that allows you to play in the space, build that relationship, and then, you know, then expand your market after that.
Great. Thanks again.
Any questions? Tom.
Right, Tom.
It's really just general comments. I'm not even sure it's a specific question. So Sanjay, I appreciate this. I mean, I think I would agree with most everything that you walked through. Just a comment, I think it was Mohammed that made the comment. Hopefully those kinds of issues could get captured in your scenario discussions earlier in there, so you don't have those kinds of rubs at the phase 3 point. Too many times a product was handed over that was set, and I think the reinforcement of the importance of getting it in early in this commercial assessments, I think, is good. A general comment, I didn't hear in their labeling strategy, and I think that one, I think about that just as a critical variable. What data am I likely to get in label, and what data am I not going to get in label? And I think that's kind of a fundamental label strategy exercise as well. But I think it's a good overview. And I, unfortunately, and I don't know what others' experiences are, I found an awful lot of rubs sometimes trying to get commercial involvement early on, whether it be compliance issues or firewalls between R&D and commercial. It sounds good. I think it takes some organizational leadership as well to make sure that the teams are talking and having those kinds of things. So anyhow, general comments only, but certainly agree with the premise of what you're saying here today.
No, I agree with you, Tom, and thank you for your comments. Clearly, with the label indication, I think, you know, commercial plays actually a key role working with the regulator as well as then clinical. You know, I mean, from commercial perspective, getting the broad label as broad as possible is always desirable, because that makes your selling experience much easier, and it makes it much easier for your commercial or marketing team to do it. So you always start with as broad label as possible, and then work with the regular team that what is possible within the regime or domain and what's not. But it's always an evolving thing. It's always, you know, it's a more tense discussion that I've been through that with those as you're getting into, say, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is too early because you're just looking at a broad indication.
Yeah, right,
as you're generating data, that's where you start thinking about, you know, like what are the indications that you can get it broader.
Yeah, it's a phase 2 discussion, I think. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, Tom, I think it's interesting. I think your observation's interesting. This is Tim. And first of all, Sanjay, thank you. But I just left the company and in a very similar situation. What I see with these small companies today is they're ran by brilliant scientists or very smart doctors, but when it comes to commercial common sense, they have none. And unfortunately, I don't know how to overcome that, to be honest, but I think that's the challenge. I think that, this is a great presentation, and I'm actually getting ready to meet with two potential clients in the next week and a half. And some of what you said, Sanjay, will be echoed to them because they just don't know. And quite frankly, I mean, I told the owners of the last company I was at that they were running the business into the ground, because they weren't thinking strategically enough long term.
Yeah, and so much investment and money is involved. I mean,
Yeah,
when it comes to that phase 3, I'll think about it. It's too late by then because the market has shifted, evolved so much that your indication or your trial has no value or merit.
Yeah, look, I mean, right now, I mean, I won't name the company, but I mean, they burned through a lot of cash very quickly. And, and now they're struggling, and they thought they were going to get an indication. And guess what happened? All of a sudden, the FDA all the truth came out. So it's a tough situation to be in because they wanted more. And had they done some of what you recommended, Sanjay, it would have been a totally different story.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it.
Many examples out there, I think, Tim. I've lived through one or two myself, actually, but
I think we all have them.
as I'm sure we all have, perhaps. But,
I think
we need
Aaron
to
had
get
the
better.
question.
That's the story. But sorry, Aaron, I was just going to go to Rick. I think Rick had a
Sorry,
question.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got 3 questions which kind of come from different angles. So see what you make of these, and please ask me if you haven't written them down as I go along. So the first one is, I read about the US Inflation Reduction Act and how that is going to affect potentially small versus large molecules, where I see, Tim, you're nodding. What I've understood is that particularly related to Medicare negotiation, where small molecules are going to have it's something like 7 years, I think, after market authorization. So then potentially, if you look at the 20-year cycle, you could swallow up easily 12 of those years in development. You go to market, and then you have to renegotiate after 7 years. So you lose your patent protection with the originally negotiated price. For large molecules, I think is about 11 years. Now, therein lies my question. Do you think pharma companies are considering that to be a significant factor in their choice of candidate drugs to invest in? Or is it not a massive lever compared to all of the other issues?
Yeah, I mean, Rick, it's a valid point and good point that, the modality of your molecule as you develop is critical. The oral molecules, the bioavailability, and then also, the R&D work is different than probably antibodies, which is your large molecule. And now even larger are the cell therapies are different. The value proposition is going to be different in both of those situations. Mm-hmm. The pricing situation or the Inflation Reduction Act, probably I don't know whether at that early or even initial stages probably would be considered as an important. And 2 things, because I think it's a value that you're bringing more rather than the life cycle of the molecule. But, if the modality just allows you to only develop a small molecule rather than an antibody based on what your science is telling, then maybe that you're not going to stop developing that just because, the Inflation Reduction Act is telling maybe you should do it differently. So it is a valid point, but I'm not sure today in terms of the net impact on that in choosing the modality would be playing a role at this point. But maybe people who are other people like Raz or Nigel can comment on that. Or even I think you said Tim.
I can tell you from what I know about the Inflation Reduction Act right now is it's a quandary, I think, for everybody. Market access is still trying to figure out what exactly it means. Yeah. I know a few consultants in that space who they're having workshops on it right now because they just don't know and the complications with it. It could, though, it may have an impact on the long run. And to the earlier discussion, may curb people from wanting to get additional indications too soon, because part of your life cycle management may be to add those indications and add on more exclusivity. I mean, that's my initial take on it, but I think it's still too early. I don't think anybody really knows what's in the policy. They're trying to diagnose it though, or dissect it.
Tom, I don't know if you wanted to come in.
I'm sorry?
I don't know if you wanted to come in on that, Tom.
Well, Yeah, I just will make a couple of comments, not to take us down an IRA path, but I do think companies are seriously thinking about investments in the Medicare space, of whether they want to continue that with the reimbursement mechanisms. And now the IRA has I think it will affect small molecules, to your point, greater than large molecules, and pushing the reimbursement mechanisms more towards payers and things like that. I think it's a benefit for a patient, but I had a perfect example yesterday talking to a local payer, and they're stepping out of the Medicare business. They're just not even going to cover that. So I think the reimbursement issues are real. I do think there's an impact on small molecules. So I can't imagine companies who are looking at pipelines, and it's probably just a good comment that was made. I think the payer mix is probably going to be a really critical variable as you think of some of these early assessments.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Dick, you have another question?
Yeah, I do. Aaron, please forgive me. I just go through these threads. So the other one was, I didn't notice in your framework if you'd mentioned, for example, patient stratification using companion diagnostics, which you, of course, if you're looking at a smaller indication, it also increases your chance of being successful with the recruited patients, the response. So there's that. And then just to throw in a related one is recently I had a short background in medical imaging, and I see that multiple myeloma, from that experience, was second in the list in HemOnc, second to non-Hodgkin's. There was about half of the volume of studies coming through, but still it's a big chunk. And what I learned from that is the workflows involving medical imaging were actually quite complex. So, it's not without its challenges, but it is high in the list of demand for HemOnc. Now, a related question there is you've got in vitro companion diagnostics, of which for multiple myeloma, I'm not familiar with. And then you've got potential for imaging companion diagnostics, which are non-invasive. And we're very early on in that becoming a reality. What's your viewpoint on all of that?
Yeah, I think first I'll answer your first question. You're asking about the companion diagnostic in your drug development on the patient selection. And yes, I mean, that is the critical factor that you look into it. If you see a definite patient going to benefit, you'll probably go after those. Now, again, here the mindset of big pharma versus small biotech may play a role. The big pharma, if the opportunity is like small, like 10, 20 million, maybe they'll shy away from that. Then they say, probably, no, I'm not interested. For a biotech company, I think that opportunity is big enough to kind of get that and then maybe get acquired by another company. And so that strategy actually is very effective for a biotech company. But regardless, small or big, large pharma, I mean, when GSK was developing the BRAF and MEK selective for melanoma, actually, and then 10 other companies did the same thing. I think selecting those population is very highly attractive. Sometimes the challenge is that the mutation occurs over time, and then maybe you lose that initial kind of efficacy, and then you have to develop a new second, third, fourth generation inhibitors. But going after those patient population with a selected biomarker from payer perspective is clearly advantageous, because payers love a precise population and they would like to know what budget impact they're going to have it on their patient population. And so knowing that is actually given in terms of your market access strategy. The second question, you're talking about the medical images and multiple myeloma. Now, multiple myeloma, I don't know whether now the medical people here can talk about it, but the BCMA is one targeted therapy that looking at, but it also is very broadly, because BCMA, which is the receptor express, is broadly expressed in the life cycle of multiple myeloma patients. So it's not like you're pre-selecting patient for that. So in myeloma, either the CD38 targeted, which is daratumumab, or BCMA targeted, which is either CAR-T or ADCs, they are usually more broader rather than patient selection. But I think as probably we can know more about these patients who are truly benefiting, and if their medical imaging is showing that data, I agree that that combination is worthwhile exploring to kind of see which patient will benefit more and will be much more specialized treatment for those patients.
So just conscious of time, but I think, Aaron, I think you had the final killer question for Sanjay today. So over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Nigel. Thanks, Sanjay. A question kind of related to the IRA and price, because you mentioned about the billions that it costs to develop molecules, and that's one of the arguments used by pharma companies against the IRA. But with AI, do you see the shortening in time for candidate selection actually allowing companies to, in effect, charge less so as not to get on the wrong side of the US government for the IRA? And then also for AI being used to target or select more favorable populations for registrational studies, it might actually lead to more burden in terms of real-world evidence generation, because you've got a smaller population because of the selected AI population in the registrational studies. So just keen on your thoughts on price and actually being able to afford it, and then also reduced registrational populations.
No, I agree. I mean, price is the key thing, you know, in every market, and in US, being in the US market long time. And now I'm actually not working for pharma companies, so I can understand, you know, how patients can feel the burden with paying for these medicines because, you know, it's not covered anymore through your regular channel. AI, I'm sure it's going to have a big impact over time. I'm not sure the magnitude of that and how quickly that can be used, but I'm sure that R&D, preclinical, or choosing that right target and molecules and going through your data from that's already generated in the marketplace through data mining, and AI will have a tremendous advantage in terms of that. So I think, you know, in the long run, it will have value in reducing the price of the whole structure. And, you know, for pharma company, if the price of drug development, the risk of those, if that goes down, because now you're only selecting or doing your trials where you know your odds of success is high, I'm sure that they will consider reducing the price and it will be a win-win for all. So I totally agree that I think the future is here now, and how quickly that can get into adoption of right clinical trial design, right identification of those targets early on is going to be critical.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for the question. And I think we should probably come to a close. But firstly, of course, thanking Sanjay for a great presentation and interaction around the Q&A. And with that also, thank you also everybody for joining and showing, you know, the huge expertise that we have across Phraktion's partner network. And I would say almost priceless what we're able to offer across the network, now over 350 people. And we'll share this across the group and beyond on our YouTube channel, much of which actually contains a few of the other areas discussed today. AI, pricing in the US, we have different webinars already around those things. So please check out the YouTube channel.